the war on misinformation and speech. So, you got the link I sent you?
Yeah, the war is not on misinformation. The war is technically on what's now being called malinformation, right? The intentional twisting of factual information into a narrative that is what's the word I'm looking for? Intended to mislead or misguide. Malinformation is what the war is on.
Right.
Misinformation is technically just wrong information, errant information. If I tell you today that a Big Mac costs $1.75, but it actually costs $1.78, that's not malinformation. That's just me saying something wrong. That's misinformation.
Right. What I'm talking about specifically is what the Department of Homeland Security just released something online saying that releasing misinformation is now considered terrorism. They implicitly said that the summary of the terrorism threat to U.S. Homeland Security.
Before we do this,
yes,
that's not what they said. But let's go ahead and look at what they actually said.
Let's look at it.
So if you scroll down,
yeah,
it's right there in the first couple lines.
The United States remains in a heightened threat environment fueled by several factors, including an online environment filled with false or misleading narratives and conspiracy theories and other forms of mis, dis, and malinformation, or MDM. Introduced and or amplified by foreign and domestic threat actors.
Correct. So what they actually said was not that misinformation is an act of terrorism. What they said is the United States remains in a heightened threat environment. Right. And that heightened threat environment is fueled by multiple factors, including mis, dis, and malinformation from foreign and domestic, what was the threat actors, right?
Right.
So a domestic threat actor can mean a lot of different things. It can mean an American who's intentionally spreading disinformation or malinformation. It could also mean a foreigner inside the United States that's amplifying or spreading those messages. That's what a domestic threat actor is. It's not just Americans. It's any threat actor with a domestic footprint. So this is one of those things that has been widely misquoted and widely misinterpreted around the world, and especially in the United States, to say that, hey, if you speak out against the American government, you're a terrorist now.
Right.
That in and of itself is an example of malinformation if the person is intentionally taking it out of context,
right,
or misinformation if the person is simply making a mistake when they quote it.
So let's see what it says. Number one, it says the proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in the U.S. government institutions.
Right. False, or the proliferation, which is intentional.
False or misleading narratives.
Yep.
So that's kind of vague. False or misleading narratives. Like if you want to talk about COVID and how the science on COVID has changed every month for the last year.
That's not false or misleading. The science has changed.
But people can claim it's false if it's wrong. If you posted something a month ago and now it's changed and it's wrong, you could easily say that that's false.
Okay.
It's very easy to portray that, but when you're moving the goalpost like that, it's very easy to portray that as false, similar to what they did with Joe Rogan by interviewing that guy.
Right. So you're right. It is in a changing goalpost, then your accurate information one day becomes misinformation a different day.
Exactly.
But that's, I think the important thing there is that the goal is to say, right now the science says this. Yesterday the science said that. There was a post by the World Health Organization in like March of 2020 that said COVID is not transmittable from person to person. That was an Instagram post, a Twitter post from the World Health Organization.
Exactly.
That does not make that malinformation. Now, if you and I were to repost that today and send out in our social media profile, see guys, COVID's fake. It's not even real. It can't be transmitted from person to person. Now, if we did that with the intent to deceive the American people, and that could be proven in a court of law, then that's exactly an example of not why we're terrorists, but it's an example of why the United States remains in a heightened threat environment fueled by domestic actors.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you would have said a month ago that if you would have said that the vaccines do not stop infection or transmission of COVID, that would have been considered misinformation.
Misinformation, right? Incorrect or incomplete information.
Now they admit it. Now the pharmaceutical companies admit it.
Right, but it would have not been malinformation. And what you're thinking about is you're thinking about this through the context of an American citizen with the best of intentions to spread meaningful information, right? What happened on Joe Rogan is a perfect example. Joe Rogan had a guest who thought he was doing the right thing by saying what he believed to be true.
Mm-hmm.
There's
right.
no intent to deceive. There's no intent
Right.
to seed discord, right? What's the proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in the U.S. government institutions?
That's the effect of it, not necessarily the intent of it.
Correct. The intent is all that matters, because if you look here, what they're talking about is the proliferation. So in order to spread something, it means that you are intentionally spreading. If I just say something and it becomes viral,
well, if you
that's not intentional.
If you believe it's true and you want to intentionally spread it to make the world a better place, of course you're trying to make your narrative viral because you think it's the right narrative.
Right.
By going on Joe Rogan, you're gonna go viral no matter what you're talking about.
But this doesn't make you a terrorist. This just is an example, right? While the conditions underlying heightened threat landscape have not significantly changed over the last year, right there it's saying it's been like this for the last year. Mm-hmm. The convergence of the following factors has increased the volatility, unpredictability, and complexity of the environment. So the bullets that you're reading through, these aren't things that make you a terrorist. These aren't reasons that the U.S. government's going to hunt you down. These are examples of why these are examples of the factors that have increased the volatility, unpredictability, and complexity of the environment. It's easy to misinterpret this, especially...
It's saying that these are the reasons that we're in a heightened environment.
Exactly right. Exactly right. What ends up happening here, brother...
Continued call for violence. What was number 2? Continued call for violence directed at U.S. critical infrastructures, soft targets, and mass gatherings, faith-based institutions such as churches, synagogues, mosques, institutions of higher education, racial or religious minority groups, government facilities, and personnel, including law enforcement and the military, the media, the perceived ideological opponents, and 3, calls by foreign terrorist organizations for attacks on the United States based on recent events.
Right. So what's happening is there's all sorts of things you don't even hear about, man, because you don't follow them, right? So if you're really into like far right, radical, violent stuff, there's an algorithm that finds you and shares
Right.
this stuff with you. If you're into like radical Islam, if you're into radical Catholicism, or if you're into radical anything, mm-hmm. there's an algorithm that's going to send you more radical stuff. Mm-hmm. Those are the people who are seeing a lot of what you see here in 2 and 3. You and I don't see what happens in 2 and 3 because we're not radicalized. Mm-hmm. That's not on us. What's the challenge has been for Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all the other social media platforms. They've had to learn how to change their algorithms so that they're not promoting. They're not helping to spread intentional malinformation or lies, which are disinformation, right? Disinformation is something that you know is false, mm-hmm. and you're saying it anyways. Mm-hmm. Malinformation is it's something you know is true, but you're taking it out of context so that it sounds a certain way.
Right.
So those two things are the big threats. Foreign actors, radicalized groups take advantage of disinformation and malinformation all the time.